Yes, well, we've saved the best till last. This one a little tricky one for some of you. An exercise scientist. Have we heard such a thing? About to find out. Thamsin Dunn is my special guest from the Australian Institute of Fitness. Thamsin, how are you?
Very well, thank you. How are you?
Very good. Exercise scientist. Sounds wonderful. What is an exercise scientist?
Basically, I'm a degree-trained personal trainer. So I did a human movement degree at UniSA and sort of chose my topics around physiology, biomechanics and things like that. And now I'm registered as an exercise scientist.
All right, you sound smart, so why would you be involved with exercise?
It's something I've always been really interested in. So grew up playing sport, netball and tennis and hockey like most kids do. When I finished school, I spent a few years playing polo around the world, got really interested in the athlete side of that rather than just focusing on the horses. And after a couple of nasty injuries, I needed to find somewhere else for my career to go, so I decided sport was it.
All right, let's stay with that one just for a minute. Polo around the world. That's not one that you hear a lot about. What drew you to polo around the world?
Well, I grew up in the hills and grew up with a very horsey family, so I was pretty lucky there. My mum did a lot of work with a family friend of ours who was an amateur polo player, and from that I met some really good contacts, and I used polo as a way to travel around the world.
Okay, not a bad idea. Let's talk about the weekend warriors. Let's shift away. You know, when you talk about sport, the people that get out on the weekend, play on the weekend, then it's a few beers after the game, how much damage are they doing to their body?
Well, the nutrition is a problem for weekend warriors, and I know I'm a weekend warrior myself, and I know the temptations are out there. But for weekend warriors, there's not a lot of information about recovery and regeneration after sport. So nutrition is a really big part of it. It's something they need to be mindful of. All
right, so we've got the nutrition covered. Then we talk about recovery being the key. So obviously for the elite athlete, the facilities are there for them, the ice baths, the fluid replacements. But for the weekend warrior, and you and I were just having a little chat about off air, if we said, look, you need to jump in a tub of ice and water, probably not going to do it. So what's the alternative?
Yeah, it's all about understanding the body's physiological response. So there's 4 aspects to recovery. And first off is the musculoskeletal damage you do. So we get lots of micro tears and build-up of waste products. That's really just about giving the body enough time to recover and regenerate there. There's a bit of damage done to your nervous system. We deplete quite a lot of the neurotransmitters there, which is actually a protective mechanism because it stops us pushing ourselves too hard and injuring ourselves later on down the track. We talk about, obviously, the replenishment of fuel and things like that, but then there's also the impact it has on your hormonal system. Most of those, it just takes time. So understanding the way your week cycle goes, giving yourself a few days after your game just to rest, relax, have a walk, stretch, massage, something like that to help clear the body out and get it ready for the next game.
All right, that brings me to a question I've been dying to ask you. Finding the balance is a really tricky one because you've got your weekend warrior that we've talked about, but then you've got those athletes that want to work out every morning, every afternoon, every night, and then I often see them deteriorating to injuries and illness. How do you find the balance? Because each individual's built so differently.
Yeah, and it is a really tricky thing, particularly with people who are really committed to their sport and want to do really, really well. They sort of exist in this mentality that more is better. And it's not necessarily more, it's better quality is better. We know that we can do cardiovascular training every day of the week, and we really recommend that, getting out there as much as possible. But when you're doing things that have high stress on the body, so your particular skills training, lifting weights, things like that, we need to limit it to 1 or 2 sessions a week. Otherwise, like you said, we start to detrain and we end up getting closer to injury. A lot of the time though, you almost need an athlete or an amateur athlete to injure themselves so they get the message and understand.
All right, when you talk about that, again, team environment, individual environments are so different, as you know, because you've worked with teams and individuals. Do you have a preference, team or individuals to work with?
Personally, I love team sport.
Yep.
I think as a professional, it's a lot easier to work with a team because you can just build that culture where everyone pushes each other. I think I'm a bit biased towards team sport as well because it's what I prefer to play.
All right, when you talk about that, the point you make is it pushes you. Is there a point where you push too far? You know, that certainly you see it where people get competitive in the weight room, if we just use that for an example. Is that a danger?
Yeah, absolutely. And with a lot of sports, we don't want one set body type for all positions. Netball's the classic example. You need little pocket rockets in the middle and big tall beasts at either end. And it's not realistic to expect the little tiny weeny ones and the big girls to do the same thing. So then it comes down to the coach and the training staff and things like that to separate the different people. Respect everyone's physiology is totally different.
I'm glad you said they were beasts at the either end, because I would cop a lot if I had said they're beasts at either end.
I'm one of them. I'm a goalkeeper.
You're one of the beasts.
So, yeah,
the goalkeeper.
Yeah,
I've got a daughter who plays in the centre, so she's a little pocket rocket, so that's okay. You talk about netball, you still play, you're
Yep.
up at my law. So when you talk about the weekend warrior, and you touched on it before, you're one of them. After the game, as an elite athlete, you're taught about fluid replacements. I regularly go and watch teams play now, and after the game, it's always some skip the shower, which is really nice, and then it's to the pub for a few beers.
Yeah.
A couple of beers we say is okay. What's the limit before you're going? And obviously, drink driving. Understand? I'm just talking about purely from the body point of view. The danger of drinking after a game.
Yeah, sure. Well, obviously, less is better. With the hydration, it's important to understand the water requirements. And we say that you should try and get 125% water in from what you've lost. And it's good to get water as well. A lot of people get really stuck on sports drinks that are good during a game, but not so good after. Every amateur sports team in the world, and probably a lot of the professional ones, a big part of being in a team is that bonding that you get when you are at the pub afterwards having a few drinks. I personally don't see a huge harm in maybe one, but when you're getting up towards the 5, 10, 15 beers, that's when it starts to get really risky, and it sets your recovery process back. Because again, we're talking about replenishment of fuel, the endocrine system, the nervous system, and getting rid of those wastes in the muscles. You need to make sure your nutrition backs that up.
All right, just the last one on that point. If I'd had a night, and I don't drink, so it's easy for me to say that, if I'd had a night with one, I've had half a dozen beers, I'm already dehydrated from the game. Now I've drunk some beers, which makes me more dehydrated. You said 125. What would I have to drink the next day to try and get myself back on track, water-wise?
Who knows?
Gallons.
Yeah, absolute gallons.
I'm in the water
tank. With a lot of athletes, they actually weigh them before and after their game so that they can really precisely calculate their fluid losses. In that, it's maybe a good thing for the amateur athlete. Just know how much you weigh, and if you wake up really parched, it's a good idea to jump on the scales, and then you can really stratify how much water you have to be getting in.
All right, so that follows your theory then, take a couple of days.
Take a couple of days.
Yeah, so you
Always
get a chance
take
to build that up.
And don't feel guilty for taking a couple of days. A lot of people really struggle with the guilt of not doing something every day. Having a nice walk and a stretch is really good, and it's not a bad thing to do.
All right, with the knowledge you've got now from the time when you were younger playing, what would you have done differently?
Oh, probably everything.
Everything, yep.
100%. When I was young and when I was involved in polo particularly, I was desperate to prove myself. And so I was up at 4:30 every morning working like a beast, and I ended up pretty crook and quite severely underweight and with all the associated problems that went along with that. And I think that's what led to my injury. I ended up getting crushed by a horse, and I was in hospital for 3 months in the UK. And I look back now and I think if I had a bit of better muscularity and I'd respected my body type more, then maybe I would have been better protected against that trauma.
Crushed by a horse.
Crushed
Can
by
you
a
take us through that?
horse.
How does one get crushed by a horse?
Part of my job when I was working in the UK was to play the young horses. So when you're with polo, we bring them on a lot quicker than most other sports. And I was getting on a young mare and she was a bit flighty, so I'd faced her into a hedge so she had nowhere to run forward. And as I was getting on, a little bird flew out of the hedge and she reared up in fright, and it was a wet day. So as she reared up, she slipped and I fell off, and the process of me falling off pulled her down on top of me. And she was about a 550 kilo horse.
Wow.
And she just landed right across my midsection and smashed my pelvis and my lower back.
And do you have trouble with that area now?
Yeah, absolutely. I have to be really careful with what I do. I find if I miss a week in the gym or something like that, I'm almost crippled. So.
All right, when you talk about the gym, and because you mentioned that area, core stability has been a massive talking point in the last couple of years across all sports, elite sports, weekend warriors, through the week, people that get into it. Why so important?
Your core really is, and the word says it all, it's the basis of the whole human body. So the core is the most exposed part we have. We've got our limbs that have got good bones underneath them. Our upper chest has got the rib cage that act like the walls of a house. And it would be awesome if we could have ribs all the way down to our pelvis, but then we wouldn't be able to turn around and see behind us. So instead we've got this group of 4 muscles that acts like the rib cage. And when they're in good condition and they're working really well, they compress to support the spine and keep it nice and strong. Now, if we've got a dysfunctional core and they go floppy, the bones just jam up on each other and there's nothing supporting them through the movement. And that's when people get a lot of disc problems. You hear about people blowing discs, herniating them and things like that, because there wasn't that tight compression to hold the spine equal.
All right, the big one, of course, is I just do lots of sit-ups. You know, we hear that one, I lie on the ground, I just go back and forth, back and forth. Although that may be okay, is that pretty close to that's not going to do it?
I would love it if no one did a sit-up again for the rest of their lives.
Because?
The sit-up it's a really interesting movement. It puts a lot of pressure through the discs going through flexion. The other thing is that people tend to do sit-ups where they haul themselves all the way up, and the muscles of the core aren't designed to move that much. If we think most muscles can contract about a third of their length, with the core muscles, that's about that distance. So if we were doing a sit-up, we'd only need to come 1 or 2 inches up off the ground, but people tend to pull themselves all the way up, which doesn't use the core muscles. It ends up using the muscles of the hips and the legs to make the movement. It also puts a lot of pressure on the disc. So we recommend Pilates type movements is much better for the core.
Good news, I'll give up sit-ups. That's fantastic. Now, you seem a reasonably intelligent woman when I spoke to you off air. Seemed reasonably intelligent now. So there's a question mark over letting a horse land on you, of course. Now let's talk about your experiences in the snow.
Yes.
So you were in the snow doing?
Yeah, I worked as a ski patroller in New Zealand and in Spain in the big resorts over there.
What was your job?
The job as a ski patroller, you're responsible for all the on-piste safety. So in the mornings we used to get picked up and taken up onto the mountain before light came up. We'd ride a skidoo to the top of the mountain. You'd go out and do some snow profile checking. If any new snow had fallen, we want to make sure the snowpack's nice and safe. If it wasn't safe, we got to throw a bit of dynamite around and loosen all of the loose snow.
Right, so you skied with dynamite.
Skied with, yep.
Just make a note of that to go with the horse landing on you. Yep, okay, that's 2 strikes.
I like high-risk activities.
Yeah, it sounds
goes
like
with
it.
the netball.
Does it?
So we'd loosen any of the snowpack that needed to be treated, and then afterwards we'd just stay on the mountain for first aid. So normally you'd get maybe 5 or 10 broken wrists a day, a couple of broken legs. Of those, 95% would be people from Queensland. So we'd go and help them and drag them down the hill and set them off with the doctors.
Did you ever throw a dynamite? Did you ever throw a stick?
Yeah, heaps.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Does it do a good job?
It does an excellent job. It is a bit scary. We learnt the hard way that you need to keep it attached to a rope. Because sometimes when you throw it, it tumbles down the mountain a bit. So
It's a good idea to throw it a fair way too, I would imagine.
I normally let the boys throw it. They've got better arms.
All right, we've talked about the weekend warrior. We've talked about those that like to do a lot finding a balance. For those that don't know, you know, they want to start some form of fitness, but don't know where to start or what to do. What should they do?
Yeah, absolutely. The best recommendation is to get a qualified personal trainer to help them. A good place to go is the Fitness Australia website. They've got a list of all the registered exercise professionals in South Australia and across Australia. And a good registered exercise professional will be able to point you in the right direction and really help you design a program that suits your goals.
All right, last question. I know we're from the Australian Institute of Fitness. Master Coach. I read on your bio, Master Coach. What is a Master Coach?
Well, my responsibility in the Australian Institute of Fitness is really protecting our syllabus. So at the Australian Institute of Fitness, we deliver the same thing nationwide. So my job is I sit on a national council that helps to make sure that what we're delivering is the most up-to-date. We talk about it being the freshest and the first in Australia. So our information comes from worldwide sources to make sure what we're teaching is the best. And then I filter that down through our coaches. We do a lot of moderation in our activities to make sure that everyone is teaching the absolute best to our students at all times.
All right, Master Coach Thamsin Dunn was my special guest. Don't be on the mountains with the snow with the dynamite. Thamsin might mistake you for someone that you shouldn't be. Time for us to finish up. Hope you've enjoyed the show. Bye, everybody.